I don't even know where to start with this. I feel like my whole world is crashing down, and I'm just sitting here watching the pieces fall. My name's Jack. I'm 34, and I've been married to Emily for 8 years. We've got 2 kids, Ethan, who's 6, and Lily, who just turned 2. On paper, we've had a great life together. A solid marriage, 2 beautiful kids, a cozy little house in the suburbs. But now, it's like everything I thought I knew was a lie. I always considered myself a pretty easygoing guy. Trusting, maybe too much so. Emily and I had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I never doubted her. Not once. She's always been the bubbly, social one, while I'm the quieter, stay home and watch Netflix kind of guy. I like that about her, how she could light up a room. But lately, I've started to wonder if that light was shining somewhere else. The first signs were subtle. So subtle I didn't even realize they were signs at the time. Emily started dressing up more than usual, cute little dresses, doing her hair differently, wearing makeup just to run errands. I didn't think much of it at first. Honestly, I thought maybe she was just trying to feel good about herself. She'd recently had a rough postpartum period after Lily, and I figured this was her way of bouncing back. Then she started yoga. She'd never been into it before, but one day out of the blue, she announced she was joining a class. "I need to do something for me," she said, and I didn't argue. I was happy for her. Taking care of 2 little kids can drain the life out of anyone, so I encouraged it. But the yoga sessions became weird. At first, they were twice a week for an hour, which made sense. Then they turned into 3 hours. "We go out for smoothies after class," she said. Okay, fine. But then it was 4 times a week, sometimes 5. She'd come home giggling about something her instructor, Chase, had said, and my stomach started to knot. Chase. His name came up way too often. "He's hilarious," she'd say. "You'd love him. He's so witty." Witty. Great. One night, she showed me a picture of her yoga group on Instagram. It was mostly women, but right there in the back, standing next to Emily, was Chase. Shirtless, tanned, with this smug grin on his face. I didn't like him immediately. Something about him just screamed trouble. "Which one is Chase?" I asked, playing dumb. She pointed at him, her face lighting up. "That's him. He's amazing. You'd love his sense of humor." I forced a smile but didn't say anything. That night, as she laughed at her phone, texting someone, I couldn't stop wondering, was she texting him? Then came the message. It was a Tuesday night, and I was downstairs cleaning up after dinner. Emily had gone upstairs to bathe the kids, and her phone buzzed on the counter. I don't usually snoop, but this time, I don't know. Something told me to look. I picked it up, and there it was. "Can't stop thinking about you." I froze. My brain went into overdrive, trying to process what I was seeing. It was from Chase. I didn't open the message. I couldn't. Instead, I set the phone down like it had burned me and just stood there. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. What the hell did this mean? I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe they were just friends. Maybe this was some weird inside joke. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down I knew. When Emily came downstairs later, I tried to act normal, but it was like my whole body was on edge. She smiled at me, completely oblivious, and sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, wondering how she could look so calm while I was falling apart inside. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. I started noticing little things I'd ignored before. How she'd angle her phone away when I walked by. How she'd giggle at texts and quickly swipe them away when I asked what was so funny. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I mean, Emily's always been outgoing. She has guy friends. That's never bothered me before. But this was different. The way she talked about Chase, the way her whole face lit up when she mentioned him, it made my stomach churn. The final straw came a couple of weeks later. Emily came home late from Yoga, again. But this time, she was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. A short, tight red dress. She'd put on heels too. Yoga, huh? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She laughed, brushing it off. We went out after class. It was last minute. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but inside, I was boiling. Who the hell wears a dress like that to yoga? That night, after she went to bed, I finally caved. I grabbed her phone and went through it. I know, I shouldn't have done it. But I had to know. What I found confirmed everything. There were texts from Chase, hundreds of them. Flirty, suggestive messages, talking about how much fun they had together, how much he missed her. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through. There was one message that hit me like a punch to the gut. Chase had sent it a few days ago. You looked amazing in that dress. Can't wait to see you again, winking face. The dress she'd worn tonight. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to wake her up and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like my world had been ripped out from under me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just in my head. My wife, the woman I'd built my life with, was lying to me. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't know how. Instead, I stayed awake, replaying every moment of our marriage, every smile, every kiss, wondering if any of it was real. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't ignore this. The days after discovering those texts were some of the longest of my life. Every interaction with Emily felt like a test of my self-control. I'd sit across from her at dinner, watching her laugh with the kids, and all I could think about was Chase. Who was he to her? What had he given her that I hadn't? And why did she think I wouldn't notice? I needed answers. I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with before I confronted her. So, I started paying attention to everything. Her habits, her schedule, her moods. It was like I was living with a stranger, trying to learn who they were all over again. The next Friday, Emily told me she was going to yoga again. Might grab drinks after, she said, kissing me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. I watched her walk out the door in another one of those new outfits she'd started wearing, a sleek black top and tight jeans that I was sure weren't for stretching. The second the door closed, I made my move. I remembered she had a tablet synced to her phone. I'd seen her check messages on it a few times, so I grabbed it from the living room shelf and opened it up. Sure enough, her texts were there, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears as I scrolled through. What I found made my blood run cold. The messages between her and Chase weren't just flirty, they were explicit. There were plans to meet up, comments about things they'd done together, and even a joke about how she hoped Jack wasn't getting suspicious. My hands shook as I read through it all, the words blurring together in front of me. It wasn't just messages either. There were photos. Selfies of them together, grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. And then, worse, pictures of her. Pictures she'd obviously sent to him. I put the tablet down and just sat there. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't harmless flirting or a crush. It was an affair. At that moment, everything became clear. The late nights, the secrecy, the lies. She'd been carrying this on behind my back for who knows how long, and I'd been too blind, too trusting to see it. But now that I knew the truth, I had to decide what to do with it. I spent the rest of the night trying to piece together a plan. Part of me wanted to confront her as soon as she walked through the door, to throw the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But another part of me, the calmer, more rational side, told me to wait. If I was going to confront her, I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. By the time Emily got home that night, I'd already hidden the tablet back where I'd found it. She came in smiling, smelling faintly of wine, and kissed me on the forehead before heading upstairs to shower. I watched her go, my stomach churning with anger and betrayal. She didn't know it yet, but the clock was ticking. The morning after Emily's yoga night, I decided it was time. I couldn't sit in silence anymore, letting her lie to my face while I pretended everything was fine. Every minute I spent holding it in was like pouring acid on an open wound. That morning, as Emily sat at the kitchen table sipping her coffee, I walked in and sat down across from her. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, but my face stayed calm, stone cold. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up from her phone, surprised. "What about?" I stared at her for a moment, taking in the face I thought I knew so well. "About you. About Chase. About what's been going on behind my back." Her reaction was immediate. Her hand froze midair, phone still in her grip. For a second, she looked confused, like she didn't understand what I was talking about. Then, like a switch had been flipped, her face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice calm but defensive. My jaw tightened. "Don't play dumb, Emily. I've seen the messages. The pictures. I know everything." Her eyes widened for a split second, just long enough for me to see the panic flash across her face before she tried to compose herself. "You went through my phone?" she said, her voice rising, like she was offended. "I did," I shot back, leaning forward. "Because I knew something was wrong. And guess what? I was right." Emily slammed her mug down on the table. "You had no right to invade my privacy." "Privacy?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're seriously pulling the privacy card? After you've been sneaking around with another guy?" Her face turned red, not from guilt, but anger. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, standing up and crossing her arms. "Chase and we're just friends. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Friends? Friends don't send each other messages like 'can't wait to see you in that dress again.' Friends don't call each other babe. And they definitely don't sneak around behind their spouses' backs." She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. "Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? Do you think I wouldn't notice? I saw the texts, the photos. I know you've been meeting him. Just stop lying." Her face crumpled then, and for a second, I thought she might actually admit to it. But instead, she doubled down. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, I've been spending time with Chase. But it's not what you think. He's just someone I can talk to, someone who listens to me. I've been so unhappy, Jack, and you haven't even noticed." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. "Unhappy? So your solution to being unhappy was to cheat on me? To lie to me and betray me instead of, I don't know, talking to me?" Tears started streaming down her face, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It just did. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling." Her excuses hit me like a slap in the face. "You didn't know how to tell me?" I said, my voice rising. "Emily, I've been here, right here, every single day. I've supported you, loved you, given you everything I have. And this is how you repay me?" She shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. But you haven't been perfect either, Jack. You're always working, always distracted. You don't even look at me the way you used to." My fists clenched at my sides. "So this is my fault now? You're blaming me for your decision to sneak around with another man?" She didn't answer. Instead, she just stood there, looking defeated but still defiant, like she wanted to fight but didn't have the energy. "Here's the thing, Emily," I said, standing up. My voice was cold now, the anger giving way to something deeper, something final. "I don't care how unhappy you were. Nothing justifies what you've done. You didn't just break our marriage. You broke my trust. And I don't think that's something we can come back from." Her eyes widened, and she stepped closer, reaching for my hand. "Jack, please." I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Emily. You don't get to please me. Not anymore. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She started crying harder, begging me to give her another chance, but I couldn't listen. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing in the kitchen. As I sat in the car later, parked in a random lot, I stared out the window, feeling like my chest had been hollowed out. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something heavier, heartbreak. This was the woman I'd loved, the mother of my kids. And she'd destroyed everything. After the confrontation, the house felt like a war zone. Emily and I avoided each other, speaking only when absolutely necessary. I stayed in the guest room while she remained in our bedroom. It was a fragile peace, but the tension was unbearable. The worst part was pretending everything was fine for the kids. Ethan and Lily were too young to understand what was happening, and I wasn't about to drag them into this mess. But every time I saw them playing, laughing, or asking for Emily, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his mom and dad aren't on the same team anymore? I wasn't eating much. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those messages, those photos. My mind kept replaying the confrontation, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if there was a version of this where I could have fixed it before it got to this point. But the truth was, I couldn't fix something I didn't know was broken. About a week after the confrontation, Emily finally came to me. It was late at night, and I was sitting in the guest room, staring blankly at the TV. She knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. "Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. She sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed, looking down at her hands. "I know I'm the last person you want to talk to right now, but I need to say this." I crossed my arms, still staring at the TV. "Say what?" Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For everything. For hurting you, for betraying you. I don't even recognize myself anymore. What I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that it wasn't about you." I finally turned to look at her, my jaw tightening. "It wasn't about me?" I repeated. "Then what the hell was it about, Emily? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels pretty damn personal." She wiped a tear from her cheek, nodding. "I know it does. And I know I've been selfish. I let myself get caught up in something I shouldn't have, and I didn't stop to think about what it would do to you, to us, to our family. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the TV. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, but I didn't have the energy anymore. "What do you want from me, Emily?" I finally asked, my voice tired. "Do you want me to forgive you? Pretend this never happened?" She shook her head. "No. I just want you to know I'm sorry. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, if you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." Her words should have moved me. A week ago, they probably would have. But now, all I felt was numb. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I can't give you an answer right now. I don't even know what I want." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and quietly left the room. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if time would even make a difference. Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her? Over the next few days, I started talking to friends and family about what had happened. At first, I was hesitant to share, embarrassed by the situation. But keeping it bottled up was eating me alive. My brother, Matt, was the first person I called. He was always the blunt one, and I knew he wouldn't sugarcoat anything. "Man, that's rough," he said after I told him everything. "But you've got to ask yourself, do you think she's really sorry, or is she just sorry she got caught?" That question haunted me. Was Emily truly remorseful, or was this just damage control? I also reached out to my old college buddy, Eric, who'd been through a messy divorce a few years back. "Look, Jack," he said, "I'm not saying you should jump straight to splitting up. But don't make any decisions out of guilt or pressure. Take care of yourself first." That stuck with me. For so long, I'd been focused on Emily, on the kids, on keeping the family together. But now, I realized I needed to focus on me, on what I needed to heal. A week later, I made an appointment with a therapist. Walking into that office felt like admitting defeat, but I knew I couldn't get through this alone. The therapist, Dr. Porter, was calm and patient, letting me vent without judgment. Betrayal is one of the deepest wounds a person can experience, she said. It's normal to feel angry, sad, and lost. But the fact that you're here shows you want to move forward, whatever that looks like for you. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a sliver of control over my life again. I still didn't know what the future held for Emily and me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else dictate how I moved forward. This was my journey now, and I was determined to take it one step at a time. After my first therapy session, something shifted in me. It wasn't like the pain disappeared overnight or that I suddenly had all the answers, but I felt focused. Dr. Porter helped me see that I didn't have to decide everything all at once. The only thing I needed to do right now was prioritize myself and the kids. Emily could wait. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that waiting didn't mean ignoring. I couldn't just brush everything under the rug and pretend life would sort itself out. If I wanted clarity, I had to figure out the whole truth, every last detail of what had happened between Emily and Chase. So I came up with a plan. The first step was gathering evidence. I wasn't trying to build some kind of legal case or anything, at least not yet. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. How long had this been going on? How deep did it go? I started by going through her phone again, this time during the day while she was out running errands. I didn't feel guilty anymore. Privacy goes both ways, and she'd smashed that boundary the moment she started sneaking around with another man. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The texts went back nearly a year. A year. That meant Emily had been lying to me for almost 12 months while we shared the same bed, the same meals, the same life. There were more photos, too. Some were harmless, selfies, pictures of their coffee cups, but others were not. One, in particular, made my stomach churn. The two of them at a hotel bar. Emily was smiling at the camera, her arm wrapped around Chase like he was her boyfriend. But it wasn't just the messages that hurt. It was the language. The way they talked to each other was so familiar, so intimate. Chase called her babe, and she called him my sweet escape. It was like reading a script for a love story where I was the villain. Then I saw something that made my blood boil. A series of texts from 2 months ago. Chase. Can't wait for our weekend. Everything's booked. Emily. Me too, face blowing a kiss. I told Jack I'm going to a yoga retreat. He totally bought it. My hands shook as I read those words. I remembered that weekend. She'd left early Saturday morning with her yoga mat and duffel bag, kissed me goodbye, and said, "Don't forget to pack Ethan's lunch for Monday." The entire time, she'd been with him. I put the phone down, my chest heaving with anger. This wasn't just an affair. It was a double life. The second step in my plan was confronting Chase. I knew I couldn't move forward without talking to him directly. Not for closure, forget that, but to look him in the eye and see if he had the guts to admit what he'd done. It wasn't hard to track him down. A quick online search for the yoga studio's schedule showed when he'd be teaching. I waited until his last class of the day and walked in as he was locking up. "Hey, Chase," I said, my voice cold and steady. He looked up, startled. For a split second, I saw recognition flicker across his face before he forced a smile. "Jack, right? Emily's husband?" "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "Her husband. You know, the guy she's been lying to while she sneaks around with you?" The fake smile dropped from his face. "Look, man, I don't know what Emily's told you, but..." I cut him off, stepping closer. "She didn't have to tell me anything. I've seen the messages. The pictures. The hotel receipts." His face went pale, and he raised his hands defensively. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear." "That's funny," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it seems like you meant for a lot of things to happen. Like taking my wife to a hotel, calling her babe, and teaching her a whole lot more than yoga." Chase stammered, searching for words. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't think she'd actually leave you or anything. Leave me? I snapped. Is that what you thought this was about? Some fling that wouldn't matter? Well, guess what, it matters. You've destroyed my marriage, my family, and for what? So you could feel good about yourself? He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I took a step back, shaking my head. You're pathetic, I said. And if I ever see you near Emily or my kids again, you'll regret it. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there in silence. The third step in my plan was harder, deciding what to do with Emily. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Honestly, I didn't even know if forgiveness was on the table. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that she was the mother of my kids, and no matter what happened, we'd have to figure out how to coexist for their sake. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat her down in the living room. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her hands. What is this, Jack? She asked cautiously. It's me asking you to tell me the truth, I said. No more lies, no more excuses. I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, what you've done, why you did it. If there's any chance of us moving forward, I need the truth. She hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears. It started last summer, she admitted. I didn't mean for it to. I thought Chase was just a friend, but then, one thing led to another, and I got swept up in it. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't tell me you didn't mean for it to happen. You made choices, Emily. Every text, every lie, every weekend away, you chose that. So don't act like you were some helpless victim. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. You're right, she said softly. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to try to make things right for us, for the kids. I stared at her for a long time, my emotions battling inside me. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to scream at her. And part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back. I don't know if we can come back from this, I said finally. But for now, we'll figure out how to be good parents. That's all I can promise you. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. It wasn't closure, and it wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. The days that followed were surreal. Emily and I lived in the same house, slept under the same roof, but it was like we were miles apart. Every interaction was strained, every glance loaded with unspoken words. We'd agreed to focus on the kids, and on the surface, we managed to keep it together. But beneath the facade, the cracks in our marriage were impossible to ignore. Ethan and Lily were my only anchor during that time. Ethan was just starting to learn how to ride his bike, and Lily was in the adorable phase where she wanted to follow me everywhere, waddling behind me like a tiny shadow. Their laughter was the only thing keeping me sane. But being around them also hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every time I looked at their faces, I saw Emily's smile in Ethan and her eyes in Lily. It was a constant reminder of the life we'd built together, and the life she'd almost destroyed. One evening, Ethan asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. Dad, why don't you and Mom hug anymore? I froze, my heart dropping to my stomach. I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. What do you mean, buddy? We're just busy, that's all. He looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, But you used to. You used to hug all the time. I felt a lump in my throat. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his mom and dad are barely holding it together? That the family he knows and loves might never be the same? We still love each other, I said finally, my voice cracking just a little. We're just figuring some stuff out right now. He seemed to accept that, running off to play with Lily, but his question lingered long after. It was a reminder that, no matter how much I wanted to keep things normal for the kids, they weren't blind to the changes. Meanwhile, Emily had started trying to rebuild some kind of bridge between us. She apologized every chance she got, offering to cook dinner, clean the house, do whatever she could to make up for what she'd done. But it wasn't that simple. Emily, I said one night after the kids were in bed, you can't fix this with chores or kind gestures. This isn't about making me a cup of coffee or folding my laundry. It's about trust. And right now, I don't have any left. Her face fell, but she nodded. I know. I don't know what else to do. I feel like I'm losing you. I wanted to tell her she'd already lost me, that I wasn't the same man who'd stood beside her at the altar 8 years ago. But part of me wasn't ready to say that. Part of me wasn't ready to let go. So instead I said, if you really want to fix this, we need help. Counseling. Therapy. Something. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she'd argue. But then she nodded. Okay. Whatever it takes. The first counseling session was awkward, to say the least. We sat on opposite ends of a couch, barely making eye contact as the therapist, a middle-aged woman named Karen, asked us questions about our marriage. Jack, what do you feel was the turning point in your relationship? She asked. I hesitated, glancing at Emily. Honestly? When I found out she was lying to me. That was the moment everything changed. Emily looked down at her hands, tears brimming in her eyes. And Emily, Karen said gently, what do you feel led to your actions? Emily's voice was barely audible. I felt invisible. Like I wasn't important anymore. Jack was always working, always busy. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I was lonely. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to yell, to tell her that I'd been working for us, for the family. But part of me couldn't deny the truth in what she said. I had been distant. I'd thrown myself into my job, thinking that providing for my family was enough, without realizing I was neglecting the emotional part of our relationship. That session ended without any major breakthroughs, but it opened the door to conversations we'd been avoiding for years. As the weeks went on, things started to shift, slowly, painfully. Emily and I learned how to talk to each other again, really talk. We started addressing the little things that had built up over time, the things we'd ignored until they exploded. But trust? That was still a distant dream. I couldn't stop thinking about Chase, about the lies, about the hotel room. Every time Emily's phone buzzed, my stomach clenched. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was going, who she was with. One night, I finally said it out loud. I don't know if I'll ever trust you again. Emily looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. I know, she whispered. But I'll keep trying until you do. And that's where we are now, stuck in this gray area between trying to move forward and not knowing if we'll ever make it. Some days I think we can do it. That maybe, with time, we can rebuild something stronger. But other days I wonder if I'm just fooling myself, holding on to a version of Emily that doesn't exist anymore. I don't know where this road leads, but for now, I'm taking it one step at a time. For the kids. For myself. And maybe, just maybe, for us. Another month passed, and while counseling had helped us talk about our feelings, it hadn't erased the lingering tension. Emily tried to show she was committed, always texting when she left the house, sharing her location without me asking, and doing her best to keep the lines of communication open. But trust isn't a faucet you can just turn back on. I still couldn't shake the memories of her texts with Chase or the image of her in that dress meant for someone else. Every time I thought we were making progress, those thoughts would creep back in, tearing down whatever fragile progress we built. One night, as I was tucking Ethan into bed, he said something that stopped me cold. Dad, do you love Mom? The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked at him, his little face so innocent and curious, and for a second, I didn't know how to respond. Of course I do, I said finally. Why do you ask? He shrugged. I just hear you and Mom talking a lot, but it sounds angry. I don't like it when you're angry. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart was breaking. Don't worry, buddy. Mom and I are just working on some stuff. We both love you and Lily more than anything. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and snuggled under his blanket. But as I left his room, his question stayed with me. Do I love Emily? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. The next day, I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our joint bank account. Transaction alert. $1,200. Chase Montgomery. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Why the hell was Chase's name on a transaction? Had Emily, was she still? I immediately called the bank, demanding an explanation. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got the answer. Emily had written a check to Chase 2 days earlier. I felt the blood drain from my face. That evening, I came home and went straight to the kitchen, where Emily was chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled, but her expression faltered when she saw the look on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. "Why did you write Chase a check?" I asked, holding up my phone to show her the bank notification. Her face turned white, and she dropped the knife onto the cutting board. "Jack, it's not what you think. Don't even start with that," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "You swore to me it was over. You promised me you weren't in contact with him anymore. And now I find out you're giving him money? What the hell, Emily?" She held up her hands, her eyes wide with panic. "It's not what you think. He reached out to me. He said he was in trouble and needed help. I didn't know what to do, Jack. I felt guilty." "Guilty?" I shouted. "Guilty for what? For ending your affair? For ruining our marriage? Why would you feel guilty for him? I'm the one you betrayed, Emily. Not him." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't care. Not this time. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. "I wasn't thinking. I just wanted him to leave us alone." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't get it, do you? Every time you talk to him, every time you lie to me, you're tearing us further apart. How can we fix this if you keep doing things like this?" She stepped closer, reaching for my arm. "Jack, I swear, it was a one-time thing. I didn't want him to make things worse. Please, you have to believe me." I pulled away, staring at her like she was a stranger. "I don't have to do anything, Emily. Not anymore." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch her cry. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing to escape before I said something I couldn't take back. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and exhaustion. At some point, I found myself parked outside Matt's house. I hadn't planned to see him, but I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of the chaos. When I told him what had happened, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Jack, I hate to say it, but it sounds like she's never going to let this guy go. Whether it's guilt, attachment, or whatever, Chase still has a hold on her. And as long as he does, you'll never be able to move on." I nodded, my throat tightening. "So what do I do?" Matt sighed. "You already know the answer, man. You've just got to be ready to say it out loud." His words stuck with me as I drove home. Deep down, I knew he was right. I'd been holding on to the hope that Emily and I could rebuild what we had, but now I wasn't so sure. How could I move forward with someone who kept dragging me back into the past? When I got home, the house was dark. Emily was in bed, and the kids were fast asleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall, wondering if I was ready to let go. Was I holding on to Emily because I still loved her? Or because I was afraid of what life would look like without her? The following morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Emily and I barely spoke, passing each other like ghosts as we got the kids ready for school. Ethan chattered about a class project while Lily tugged at her Velcro shoes, blissfully unaware of the tension swirling around them. As I drove to work, Matt's words replayed in my head, "You already know the answer. You've just got to be ready to say it out loud." By the time I parked, I realized I couldn't go on like this. Pretending we could fix something that had been shattered into pieces was exhausting, and it was taking a toll on everyone, especially me. I texted Emily during my lunch break. "We need to talk tonight. After the kids are asleep." Her response came almost immediately, "Okay." No excuses, no deflection. Just that single word. That evening, once the kids were in bed, Emily came downstairs and found me sitting in the living room. I had the family photo album open on the coffee table, though I hadn't actually flipped through it. It was just there. A reminder of what we'd built, and what we stood to lose. She sat down across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Jack," she started, her voice trembling. "Before you say anything, I just want to tell you again how sorry I am. For everything. I know I've hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." I nodded, my chest tightening. "I know you're sorry, Emily. But sometimes sorry isn't enough." Her face fell, but she didn't interrupt. "I've been trying so hard to see if we can move past this," I continued. "But every time I think we're making progress, something else happens. Chase's name comes up. Another lie comes out. And it takes me right back to that moment when I found out. Like a scab being ripped off over and over." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but I pressed on. "I'm exhausted, Emily. I've spent weeks trying to figure out if we can rebuild what we had, but I don't even recognize what we had anymore. I don't know if I can trust you again, not because I don't want to, but because I physically can't. Every time I look at you, all I can see is what you did." Her sobbing grew louder, but I kept my voice steady. "And that's not fair to either of us. I don't want to spend the rest of my life resenting you. And I don't want you spending the rest of your life trying to make up for something I may never get over." She wiped her face with trembling hands, her voice barely audible. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. "Yes," I said finally. "I think it's the only way we can both move forward. I don't want to hate you, Emily. But if we stay together, I'm afraid that's exactly what will happen." She collapsed into sobs, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to take it all back. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, letting the silence fill the room. The next few days were a blur. Emily moved into the guest room, and we started discussing the logistics of separating, who would stay in the house, how we'd split custody, what we'd tell the kids. Every conversation felt like tearing off another piece of my soul, but I knew it was the right thing to do. When we sat Ethan down to tell him, his reaction shattered me. "Are you and Mom mad at each other?" he asked, his little brow furrowed. "No, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "Mom and I we need to live in different houses for a while. But we both love you and Lily so much, and that will never, ever change." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he threw his arms around me. "I don't want you to leave." I held him tightly, blinking back my own tears. "I know, Ethan. I know. But I promise, you'll still see me all the time. We're still a family." Lily didn't fully understand what was happening, but she clung to Emily, sensing the sadness in the room. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. Emily moved out 2 weeks later. She found a small apartment nearby so the kids wouldn't have to switch schools. On moving day, I helped her load boxes into her car, the silence between us heavy but not hostile. As she shut the trunk, she turned to me, her eyes red and puffy. "Jack," she said quietly, "I just want you to know, I'll always regret what I did to us. And I'll always be grateful for the life we had, even if it didn't last." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. And then, she was gone. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of memories, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But deep down, I knew I had. Some wounds can't be healed, no matter how much you want them to. And sometimes, the best way to move forward is to let go. The first week after Emily moved out was a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. The house felt too quiet without her presence, but at the same time, I could finally breathe. There was no tension, no second-guessing every interaction. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking on eggshells. But the emptiness hit hard. At night, I'd sit in the living room, staring at the spot on the couch where Emily used to curl up with her blanket, scrolling through her phone. I hated how much I missed her, even after everything she'd done. The kids, though, didn't give me much time to wallow. They kept me grounded, their routines pulling me back into the present. Ethan had soccer practice twice a week, and Lily had just started daycare. Every time I picked them up or helped them with homework, I reminded myself that they were the priority now. And if I'm honest, being a single dad scared the hell out of me. The first real challenge came the following weekend. It was my turn to have the kids, and I wanted to make it special, something to distract all of us from the massive changes in our lives. I planned a backyard camping night, tent, s'mores, ghost stories, the works. Ethan was thrilled, running around the yard with a flashlight pretending to be an explorer. Lily toddled after him, laughing as he discovered a treasure map he'd drawn earlier. For a few hours, it felt like everything was normal. But later, as the kids drifted off to sleep in the tent, the weight of everything came crashing down. I lay there in the darkness, staring up at the stars, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Would they grow up resenting me for ending our family? Would I ever stop feeling like I'd failed them? The next morning, I got a text from Emily. "How were the kids last night?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "They were fine. We camped in the backyard. Ethan loved it." A minute later, she responded. "That sounds amazing. Thank you for being such a good dad." I didn't reply. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I focused on work, took up jogging again, and even started reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage. Matt checked in regularly, always quick with some sarcastic comment to make me laugh. "You should get on one of those dating apps," he joked one night over a beer. "Swipe your way to happiness." I laughed, shaking my head. "Not a chance. I need to figure myself out before I drag someone else into this mess." Still, the idea of dating felt like an impossible mountain to climb. How do you even start over after almost a decade of marriage? The biggest surprise came about a month later. Ethan's school held a parent-teacher conference, and as I sat in the classroom listening to his teacher talk about his progress, I felt a strange sense of pride. "Ethan's a wonderful kid," she said, smiling. "He's been talking a lot about how much fun he's having with you lately. The camping trip, helping you fix the bike, it's clear he looks up to you." I nodded, trying not to get choked up. "Thanks. I just want to make sure he feels safe, you know?" She nodded. "You're doing a great job, Jack. He's lucky to have you." Those words stuck with me long after I left the classroom. For so long, I'd felt like I was failing as a husband, as a father, as a person. But maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. A few nights later, I was scrolling aimlessly through my phone when I stumbled upon an old photo of Emily and me. It was from a beach trip years ago, back when we were still in the honeymoon phase. We looked so happy, so carefree. For a moment, I felt the familiar ache of loss. But then I realized something. I wasn't just mourning Emily. I was mourning the version of myself that existed in that photo. The man who believed in forever, who thought love could conquer anything. That man was gone. But maybe in his place, there was someone stronger. Someone who could take the pain and turn it into growth. I put the phone down and picked up a book I'd been meaning to read for years. It was a small thing, but it felt like a step forward. Life didn't magically get better after that. There were still hard days, days when I felt like a failure, days when I missed Emily, days when I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. But there were good days too. Days when Ethan and Lily made me laugh so hard my sides hurt. Days when I'd go for a run and feel the tension melt away. Days when I'd catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and think, "You're going to be okay." And for now, that was enough. The first week after Emily moved out was one of the loneliest of my life. The house felt impossibly quiet, even with Ethan and Lily running around. Every room seemed to echo with memories I didn't want to relive. The bed felt too big, the kitchen too empty. Even the simple act of making coffee in the morning reminded me of how Emily would sit at the counter, scrolling through her phone and humming softly under her breath. But at the same time, there was an odd sense of relief. The constant tension that had weighed down the house for months was gone. I no longer had to watch her every move, wondering if she was being honest with me. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I threw myself into creating a routine for the kids. Mondays and Tuesdays, they stayed with me. Wednesdays and Thursdays, they were with Emily. Weekends alternated. On the days they weren't home, I kept busy by working late, going to the gym, or tackling projects I'd put off for years. But no matter how busy I kept myself, there were moments when the loneliness hit me like a wave. One Friday night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Emily and me on vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. Pictures of the kids as babies, their tiny hands clutching ours. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the screen. I hated how much I missed her. I hated how, even after everything she'd done, part of me still loved her. Therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Porter encouraged me to focus on myself, to rebuild my identity outside of being a husband and father. She told me it was okay to grieve the life I'd lost, but reminded me not to let that grief define me. "What do you want, Jack?" she asked during one session. I shrugged, unsure how to answer. "I just want to feel normal again. Like I'm not walking around with this weight on my chest all the time." She nodded. "That's a good start. But what does normal look like for you now? What makes you happy? What gives you a sense of purpose?" I didn't have an answer that day. But over the next few weeks, I started to think about her question. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I pulled out my guitar. I hadn't played in years, not since Ethan was a baby. Life had gotten too busy, and the guitar had collected dust in the corner of the basement. As I strummed the strings, memories came flooding back. Late nights in college, playing songs around a bonfire. Serenading Emily in our tiny first apartment. Teaching Ethan the basic chords when he was 3, his little hands too small to hold the strings properly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of something. Not happiness, exactly, but something close. I started playing more often, finding solace in the music. It became my escape, my therapy. Emily and I remained civil, if not friendly. We communicated mostly through text, discussing the kids' schedules and other logistics. There were no long conversations, no attempts at reconciliation. It was a clean break, at least, as clean as it could be under the circumstances. One evening, when she came to pick up the kids, she lingered in the doorway for a moment. "You're looking better," she said hesitantly. I nodded. "Thanks. I'm trying." She smiled sadly. "I'm glad. You deserve that." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded again. A few months later, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. Rachel and I had gone to high school together, though we'd lost touch after graduation. She was pushing a cart with a toddler in the seat, her long brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. "Jack?" she said, her eyes widening. "Rachel?" I replied, equally surprised. We chatted for a while, catching up on each other's lives. She was divorced too, raising her son on her own. There was an ease to our conversation, a shared understanding of the challenges we both faced. Before we parted ways, she smiled and said, "We should grab coffee sometime. It'd be nice to catch up." I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for that kind of connection. But then I thought about what Dr. Porter had said about rebuilding my life. "Yeah," I said finally. "That sounds great." It wasn't a date, at least not officially. But sitting across from Rachel at a little cafe, sipping coffee and laughing about old high school memories, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't ask about hers. We just talked, like two old friends reconnecting. As I drove home that evening, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to find my way forward. Meeting Rachel was like finding a light in the middle of a storm. It wasn't that everything suddenly became easy or that I stopped thinking about Emily entirely. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was more than just the guy who got cheated on. I was Jack, the guy who could laugh, share stories, and maybe even start to imagine a future that didn't revolve around pain. After that coffee meetup, Rachel and I started texting occasionally. It wasn't anything deep, Just jokes about the chaos of parenting or random memes that made us laugh. It was casual, effortless, and exactly what I needed. Still, I was cautious. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, and I made that clear to her the next time we met for coffee. "Look, Rachel," I said, swirling the foam in my latte with a spoon. "I don't know if I'm in a place to, date." She smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "Jack, I'm not either. Trust me, I'm just happy to have someone to talk to who gets it. No pressure, no expectations." Her words felt like a weight off my shoulders. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. I focused on work, the kids, and rediscovering myself. Music became a bigger part of my life again, and I even started teaching Ethan some simple chords on the guitar. He loved it, though Lily quickly got jealous and demanded her own lessons. "You're too little for guitar," Ethan teased her one night. She pouted, crossing her arms. "I'm not little." The moment made me smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that felt rare these days. Emily and I continued co-parenting as best we could. There were moments of tension, of course. Like the time she forgot to pick Ethan up from soccer practice and blamed it on a long day at work. Or when she brought the kids home late after a weekend at her place, claiming she lost track of time. I tried to let those things slide, for the sake of peace. But one evening, after Lily came home with a scraped knee and no explanation, I decided it was time for a serious conversation. "Emily," I said when she dropped the kids off that night, "we need to talk." She sighed, already looking defensive. "About what?" "About boundaries," I said firmly. "I'm not trying to micromanage your time with the kids, but we need to be on the same page. If something happens, I need to know. No more surprises." Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry, Jack. I'll do better." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Rachel and I kept things simple. We met for coffee every couple of weeks, texted when we felt like it, and kept the conversation light. But as time went on, I started looking forward to those meetups more than I expected. One evening, as we walked out of the cafe, she hesitated. "Jack," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "I know we said no pressure, but I really enjoy spending time with you. And I think you're an amazing person." Her words caught me off guard. "Rachel, I started, but she held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything," she said with a smile. "I just wanted you to know." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the parking lot with a strange mix of emotions. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the photo album again. I flipped through the pages, pausing on one of Emily and me on our honeymoon. We looked so young, so carefree. It felt like a lifetime ago. Then I thought about Rachel, her laugh, her kindness, the way she made me feel like I wasn't just a broken version of myself. Maybe I wasn't ready to move on completely, but I was starting to realize that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant taking the lessons from my past and using them to build something new. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. A few weeks after Rachel's confession, I found myself replaying her words in my head. "I really enjoy spending time with you. And I think you're an amazing person." At first, I wasn't sure how to feel. It had been less than 6 months since Emily and I had separated, and the thought of jumping into something new felt strange. Was I ready for that? Did I even deserve it? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how good Rachel had been for me. She never pushed, never demanded more than I could give. She just showed up, with her easy laugh and her empathetic presence. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like Jack, the guy whose wife cheated on him. I was just Jack, a man trying to put the pieces of his life back together. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Emily's, I sat in the car for a long time before finally pulling out my phone. My hands hovered over the screen as I typed and retyped my message, second-guessing myself the whole time. Finally, I hit send. "Hey Rachel. Can we grab coffee this weekend? There's something I want to talk about." Her reply came within minutes. "Of course." Let me know when works for you. That Saturday, I met Rachel at the same cafe we always went to. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. "Hey," she said, smiling warmly as I sat down across from her. "Hey," I replied, suddenly feeling nervous. We chatted for a while about the usual things, work, kids, life, but I could tell she was waiting for me to bring up whatever I'd mentioned in my text. After a long sip of my coffee, I finally took the plunge. "Rachel, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night," I began. "About enjoying spending time together and, well, about me." She looked down at her tea, her cheeks flushing slightly. "You don't have to." "No, let me finish," I said, cutting her off gently. "You've been amazing. You've helped me more than I think you realize, just by being there and reminding me what it feels like to laugh again. And I want to see where this goes. If you're still okay with taking it slow." Her eyes lit up, and she nodded. Slow is perfect. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or some cinematic moment, but it felt right. The weeks that followed were a mix of highs and lows. Rachel and I started spending more time together, but I was careful to keep our relationship separate from the kids. I didn't want to introduce them to anyone new until I was sure it was the right thing to do. Emily, of course, noticed the change in me. "You seem happier," she said one evening when she came to pick up Ethan and Lily. "I am," I said simply. She hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. "Is it someone new?" I debated whether to answer, but eventually I nodded. "Yeah. Her name's Rachel. We're taking things slow." Emily looked away, her jaw tightening slightly. "Well, I'm glad you're happy, Jack. You deserve that." There was a hint of sadness in her voice, but she didn't press further. A few months later, Rachel and I decided it was time for her to meet the kids. We planned something low-key, a picnic at the park where Ethan could show off his soccer skills and Lily could run around to her heart's content. Rachel was nervous. "What if they don't like me?" she asked as we packed sandwiches and snacks. "They will," I assured her. "Just be yourself." To my relief, the introduction went smoothly. Ethan was shy at first, but he warmed up quickly when Rachel joined in on their game of tag. Lily, on the other hand, latched onto her almost immediately, insisting that Rachel push her on the swings. As I watched them laugh and play, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still moments when the past crept in, memories of Emily, flashes of anger or sadness when I thought about what she'd done. But those moments were fewer and farther between. Rachel and I continued to build something new together, slowly but steadily. She wasn't a replacement for Emily, she was something entirely different. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Rachel turned to me and said, "You know, Jack, you've come a long way from the guy I ran into at the grocery store." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, I guess I have." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Life had settled into a rhythm, though normal wasn't a word I'd use just yet. Co-parenting with Emily had its challenges, and building a relationship with Rachel while navigating everything else felt like juggling flaming torches. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering the ship instead of being tossed around by the waves. Emily and I communicated strictly about the kids. The civil tone we'd managed to maintain made things easier, but it was clear we were both walking on eggshells. There were occasional missteps, like the time she forgot to tell me Ethan had a dentist appointment, or when I showed up 10 minutes late to pick them up from her place, but we tried to let the little things slide for the sake of peace. One evening, while helping Ethan with his math homework, he asked a question I'd been dreading. "Dad, do you think you and Mom will ever get back together?" I froze, the pencil I'd been holding hovering over the page. "Why do you ask, Bud?" He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the worksheet in front of him. I don't like it when you're not both here." My chest ached, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I know it's hard, Ethan. But your mom and we're better apart. We both love you and Lily so much, and that's never going to change." But sometimes people are happier when they live in different houses. He looked up at me, his brow furrowed. Are you happy? The question hit me harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, offering a small smile. Yeah, buddy. I am. And I want you to be happy too. He didn't say anything else, but the way he leaned into me as we worked on his homework told me he understood, at least a little. Introducing Rachel to the kids had gone smoother than I could have hoped, but I knew it was still new for them. She didn't push for a big role in their lives, instead letting things unfold naturally. One weekend, she joined us for a trip to the zoo. Lily was thrilled to show Rachel her favorite animals, while Ethan acted as our unofficial tour guide, pointing out random facts he'd learned from a book about tigers. As we sat on a bench eating ice cream, I caught myself watching Rachel interact with the kids. She was patient, kind, and genuinely interested in everything they had to say. It was a moment that felt almost normal. But later that evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself staring at an old photo of Emily and me at the same zoo, Ethan in a stroller and Lily not even born yet. The pang of nostalgia was sharp, but it didn't overwhelm me the way it once had. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how far I'd come, and how much further I still had to go. Emily had been keeping her distance from Rachel, which I appreciated. I wasn't ready for them to meet yet, and Rachel didn't push the issue. That changed one evening when Emily came to pick up the kids earlier than expected. Rachel had stayed over to help me with dinner, and was sitting at the kitchen table when Emily walked in. "Oh," Emily said, stopping in the doorway. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, then back to me. "I didn't realize you had company." Rachel stood, offering a small, polite smile. "Hi, you must be Emily." "I'm Rachel." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Nice to meet you." The air was thick with tension as they exchanged awkward pleasantries. Emily's smile was tight, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. After a few minutes, she ushered the kids out the door without much conversation. When she was gone, Rachel turned to me, her brow furrowed. "That was weird." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah. I probably should have given her a heads up." Rachel shook her head. "It's fine. I get it. That can't be easy for her." Her understanding made me admire her even more. Later that week, Emily called me. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. "About what?" I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew. "About Rachel," she said. "If she's going to be spending time with the kids, I think we need to set some ground rules." I bristled at her tone but kept my voice calm. "Emily, I get that this is new for you, but Rachel's been nothing but respectful. She doesn't overstep, and the kids like her. This isn't about ground rules, it's about you feeling uncomfortable." There was a long pause before Emily sighed. "Maybe it is. I don't want to feel like I'm being replaced." Her admission surprised me. "You're their mom, Emily," I said softly. "No one's replacing you. But Rachel is part of my life now, and I need you to respect that." She didn't respond right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "Okay. I'll try." That conversation marked a turning point. Over time, Emily and Rachel developed a cautious understanding. They weren't friends, but they were civil. For the kids, that was enough. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Rachel, watching the sunset, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different life is now?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "And are you okay with that?" I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "Yeah. I am." Because for the first time in a long time, the chaos of the past felt like just that, the past. Months passed, and life settled into a new kind of rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, something I hadn't felt in years. The kids seemed happier too, adjusting to the changes with a resilience I envied. I realized that while I was busy worrying about how the divorce would affect them, they were quietly adapting in ways I hadn't expected. Rachel became a steady presence in my life and cautiously in the kids' lives. She never pushed for more than they were ready to give, and I think that's why they grew to adore her. Ethan loved having someone who would listen to him talk about his latest Minecraft creations, and Lily loved curling up next to her on the couch during movie nights. Emily, for her part, stuck to her word. While things between us would never be warm, we'd settled into a respectful co-parenting relationship. She'd even started dating again, though she kept it under wraps at first. The first time she mentioned it was during a drop-off. "So, I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, adjusting Lily's jacket. "I've started seeing someone. His name's Greg." "Okay," I said, nodding slowly. "I wanted to tell you before the kids mentioned anything," she added, her tone careful. "It's still new, but I thought you should know." "Thanks for telling me," I said. And I meant it. Hearing she was moving on felt strange, but not in the way I expected. I didn't feel jealous or angry. If anything, it was a relief. Maybe this was the final piece we both needed to fully let go of the past. As Emily's relationship with Greg grew, it gave us both more space to focus on our own lives. It also led to a surprising moment of solidarity. One afternoon, Emily and I met for coffee to discuss some changes to the kids' schedules. It was the first time we'd sat down together outside of a pickup or drop-off, and I wasn't sure how it would go. "I appreciate you meeting me," she said, stirring her coffee. "I figured it would be easier to talk without the kids around." "No problem," I replied, taking a sip of my drink. We talked about summer plans, school schedules, and the kids' extracurricular activities. It was civil, almost businesslike, until she suddenly looked up and said, "Jack, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said cautiously. "Do you think we'll ever be friends?" The question caught me off guard. I sat back in my chair considering it. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think we're doing okay as co-parents. But friends?" I shook my head. "That's a harder road." She nodded, her expression tinged with regret. "I get that. I miss the part of us that used to work, you know?" "I do," I said, meeting her gaze. "But that part of us is gone, Emily. And that's okay. We've both moved on. We're just in different chapters now." She smiled sadly. "Different chapters? Yeah, I guess we are." Rachel and I grew closer as time went on. While I'd initially been hesitant to open up to her about my past, I found that she understood in ways I hadn't expected. She'd been through her own divorce, after all, and she knew how hard it was to let go of the pain while trying to rebuild. One evening, as we sat on the couch after the kids had gone to bed, I finally opened up about something that had been weighing on me. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done more," I admitted, staring at the ceiling. "If I'd been a better husband, maybe things wouldn't have fallen apart." Rachel rested her hand on mine. "Jack, you can't put that all on yourself. Relationships are two-way streets. You did your best, and so did she, in her own way. It just didn't work." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "How do you let go of that kind of guilt?" "You don't, entirely," she said softly. "But you learn to live with it. And eventually it gets quieter." Her words stayed with me. The turning point came during a family day at Ethan's school. It was a spring carnival, and Emily, Greg, Rachel, and I all ended up there at the same time. I'll admit, it was awkward at first. Greg and I exchanged polite nods, and Rachel greeted Emily with her usual warmth, though I could tell she was nervous. But as the day went on, something unexpected happened. We found a way to coexist. We cheered for Ethan during the sack race, took turns helping Lily with the ring toss, and even sat at the same picnic table for lunch. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension. But for the kids, it was everything. As we packed up to leave, Ethan ran up to me, grinning ear to ear. "Dad, this was the best day ever." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "I'm glad, buddy." And I meant it. That night, as Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the stars, she turned to me and said, "You did good today." "So did you," I replied, squeezing her hand. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" "Sometimes," I said, staring out at the dark sky. but I'm trying to think more about where I'm going. She nodded, her voice soft. Where do you think that is? I looked at her, the woman who'd helped me find hope again, and smiled. Somewhere good. Life kept moving forward, and with each passing week, the jagged edges of the past felt a little smoother. Emily and I had settled into a co-parenting rhythm that, while not perfect, worked well enough. The kids were thriving, and I could see the shift in their moods. They seemed lighter, happier, more at ease. Rachel had become a steady part of my world, seamlessly blending into the life I was rebuilding. She didn't try to take Emily's place or change the dynamic I had with my kids. She simply added her own warmth and support to the mix. One weekend, she joined us for a trip to the lake. Ethan was eager to show her how much better he'd gotten at skipping rocks, and Lily spent most of the day clinging to Rachel, proudly announcing, "Rachel is my friend." It was moments like these that made me realize how much my life had changed, and how much better it had become. But even as I moved forward, there were still moments when the past crept in. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Emily's, I found myself driving by the restaurant where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. It had been one of the happiest nights of my life, Emily in a deep blue dress, laughing at my terrible jokes, the two of us talking about everything we wanted for our future. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a while, staring at the glowing sign. Part of me wanted to go inside, to relive that night, and remind myself of the good times we'd had. But I knew better. Instead, I sat there and let the memories wash over me. I let myself feel the sadness, the regret, and the bittersweet nostalgia. And then I let it go. Rachel noticed the shift in me after that night. "You seem quieter lately," she said one evening as we sat on my porch, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. "I've just been thinking," I admitted. "About the past, about how far I've come, about where I want to go from here." She nodded, her eyes searching mine. "And where do you want to go?" I took a deep breath, glancing at the kids before turning back to her. "I want to keep building something good. For them, for me, for us." Her expression softened, and she reached for my hand. "You're already doing that, Jack. And you're doing a damn good job." As the months passed, Emily's relationship with Greg grew more serious, and eventually, she brought up the idea of introducing him more formally to the kids. "I want them to meet Greg as more than just Mom's friend," she said during one of our weekly check-ins about the kids' schedules. "But only if you're okay with it." I appreciated her asking. I knew how important it was to handle these things carefully, especially with the kids still adjusting to everything. "Let's take it slow," I said. "Start with something casual, like a park day. If the kids seem okay with it, we'll go from there." Emily nodded, looking relieved. "Thanks, Jack. I know this isn't easy." "None of this is easy," I said with a small smile. "But we're figuring it out." The park day with Greg went smoother than I expected. He was polite, patient, and genuinely seemed to care about the kids. Ethan was hesitant at first, but Greg won him over by helping him practice his soccer moves. Lily, of course, charmed him instantly with her endless chatter about her favorite stuffed animals. Watching them interact, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that Greg seemed like a good guy, and a strange sadness that this was the new reality. But more than anything, I felt a sense of peace. Emily and I had both moved on, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly closing the chapter on our old life. Later that evening, Rachel and I sat in the living room, the kids fast asleep upstairs. "How do you feel about Greg?" she asked, curling up beside me on the couch. "He seems like a good guy," I said honestly. "And the kids seem comfortable with him. That's what matters." Rachel nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "You've come a long way, you know. The Jack I met at the grocery store wouldn't have handled today so gracefully." I chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "Yeah, well, the Jack you met at the grocery store was kind of a mess." "And now?" she asked, her voice teasing but gentle. "Now I think I'm finally figuring it out," I said. She smiled, and in that moment I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. It was a warm autumn afternoon when I finally realized how far I'd come. The leaves were turning shades of red and gold, and the air had that crisp, clean feel that always reminded me of new beginnings. Ethan and Lily were playing tag in the yard, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. Rachel sat beside me on the porch, sipping coffee from one of my old mugs. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. The chaos that had once consumed my life, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the uncertainty, had settled into something I could live with. It wasn't that I'd forgotten what had happened. I still thought about it sometimes, still felt that pang when certain memories crept up. But it no longer controlled me. That sense of closure came into sharp focus one evening when Emily called. "Hey Jack," she said, her voice hesitant. "Do you think we could talk? Not about the kids. Just us." I paused, caught off guard. "Sure. When? Maybe tomorrow? After work?" "Okay," I said, unsure of what to expect. The next day, we met at a small coffee shop near her apartment. She was already seated when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Thanks for coming," she said, offering a small smile. I nodded, sitting down across from her. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About everything that happened between us. About how much I hurt you." I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "I don't think I ever truly apologized," she said, her voice trembling. "Not in the way you deserved. I was selfish, Jack. I didn't think about what my actions would do to you, to our family. And for that, I'm so sorry." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd waited to hear those words, to feel like she truly understood the damage she'd caused. And now, hearing her say it, I felt lighter. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I think I needed to hear that." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know how sorry I am." I took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "Emily, I've forgiven you. Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to the anger, it was eating me alive. But letting go of it? That's what let me move forward." Her expression softened, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same page. We talked for a while after that, not about the past but about the future, how we could continue to co-parent, how we could support each other as we built separate lives. By the time we left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought was possible. Life continued to move forward. Emily and Greg got engaged a few months later, and while it felt strange at first, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved to be happy, just as I did. Rachel and I, meanwhile, were building something solid and beautiful. She was patient with me, never rushing or pressuring, and I loved her all the more for it. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Ethan and Lily fast asleep inside, I turned to her and said, "You know, I don't think I would have made it through this without you." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You would have, Jack. You're stronger than you think. But I'm glad I could be here with you." A year later, on a sunny spring afternoon, I found myself standing in the middle of a park, surrounded by friends, family, and the two people who mattered most, Ethan and Lily. Rachel stood beside me, her smile brighter than the sun, her hand resting gently in mine. The kids were thrilled when we announced the engagement. Ethan had insisted on being my best man, and Lily had squealed with delight when we asked her to be the flower girl. As I looked around at the people who had supported me through the darkest time of my life, I realized something. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was a new book, one I was writing on my own terms. When Rachel and I exchanged vows, there was no doubt in my mind. I'd found my way back to happiness, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. And as I kissed my wife, surrounded by laughter and love, I knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come.